Yes, hello again, and another very warm welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, the home of these old school vintage off-roaders. Now, as we head towards the end of 2023, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look back at some of the nice bikes that I came across during that 2023 racing season. Now, we've had a good selection in the part 1 video that we just recently posted, so we're going to follow that up with a few more examples here in this part 2. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into the next video and take a look at our latest selection of machines. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off this part 2 of our look back at 2023, and we're going to start with this quite rare and unique Serco Triumph Tiger Cub 250 that originally belonged to Scottish racer and motorcycle dealer Jimmy Allen. So originally this bike here was built by Scottish enduro racer and bike builder Dave Hope, who built it to be used as a trials bike up until it was then bought by Jimmy Allen and then converted to be used as a lightweight scrambles bike by Jimmy's brother, the legendary Vic Allen. Now, soon after Vic Allen had done all the conversion on the bike, he did do a few off-road trials and scrambles races on the bike before passing it on to his brother Jimmy, so that he could race it. But to change it to scrambles trim, Vic uprated the front and rear suspension and also did a bit of tuning on the engine by fitting a high lift cam, bigger carburetor and a high compression piston. Now, as you know, these Triumph Tiger Cub 4-stroke motors were basically all 200cc, but our engine here has now been bored out to 250cc just to give it a little bit more power for scrambles use. And as far as I'm aware, apart from the aforementioned high lift cam and the bigger carburetor and that upgraded rebore, the rest of the engine is pretty much still in stock standard trim. And the Serco part of this bike's title was the supplier of the upgraded parts on this Tiger Cub. And Serco back in the day did supply parts and did engine conversions on these 4-stroke motors, but as far as I know, they are no longer trading, but they were quite a big name back in the day in the 1960s and 1970s. And the bike's frame is just basically a stock standard Triumph Tiger Cub chassis, and as far as I'm aware, it's not been upgraded in any way. Now, at the front end of the bike, the original Tiger Cub forks have been replaced with what looks like a pair of heavier BSA forks, and this was one of the upgrades that was done to make it a bit more suitable for scrambling rather than trials. And here at the back end of the bike, Vic Allen also swapped the lighter dampers that were used for trials use for these heavier and more substantial rock shocks, which are much more suitable to the bumps and jumps associated with classic scrambles. Now, as far as I know, the original Tiger Cub fuel tank was also kept on this bike and also fitted onto the front and the back wheels. It was still old school drum brakes that had the job to slow this little racer down. But you still can't help thinking that this lovely little bike's been slightly spoiled by fitting those hideous black wheels, and I certainly don't know what this current fascination is about black wheels on these vintage race bikes these days, because these black rims make a bike look like something from the 1920s rather than the 2020s, and I just can't help but wonder how nice this little cub would have looked with a nice pair of polished chrome rims. So if you're watching this video and are currently in the process of building your own vintage classic, then remember, no black wheels. Insist on good old chrome wheels on your classic bike. But anyhow, rant over. So that was the late and great Jimmy Allen's favourite race bike. That was his little Serco Tiger Cub 250 Scrambler, which was actually up for sale on the day for £4,950. Now this was another little beauty that caught my eye at the Scottish Classic meeting near Bassenthwaite in the summer of 23, and this Spanish Bultaco 360 belonged to Philip Witham. So as to the bike's actual year of manufacture, I'm not exactly sure because I never actually asked Philip on the day, but it looks like it could be maybe a 1974 or even a 1975 bike, and of course in fantastic original condition, as you can see. But again, Bultaco were another one of the big Spanish motorcycle manufacturers of the 1970s, and these light and very powerful two-stroke racers were hugely popular in Europe during that period, and they also sold in quite good numbers in the USA as well, although what elevated these bikes' popularity to stratospheric levels was when American legend Jim Pomeroy won the 1973 Spanish 250 Grand Prix on one of these machines, and soon after it seemed that every American dirt bike racer just wanted to get their hands on one of these fantastic little Bultacos. But these 360 Bultacos were powered by a simple piston port two-stroke engine, which had that forward-facing kickstarter when it was in the folded position, just like the Spanish Montezos of its day. Although in terms of their power and their reliability, these were very quick motors that were both compact and well engineered, and overall these Spanish Bultacos were a very good motocross package with that relatively light tubular steel frame and swing arm, and this pretty awesome two-stroke motor, which was said to put out around the 39 horsepower mark, although they do say that the brochure claimed horsepower was somewhat different to what these engines actually put out on the track. But many of these Pearson Bultacos had Spanish-made beater forks fitted onto the front end, which even for the mid-1970s were still considered quite good suspension units, and they certainly suited these light flickable Persons perfectly. But moving on to the back of our Bulto, it would have also been a pair of beater rear shocks on this bike in the 1970s, although as you can see, Phillips now upgraded his machine to these very high quality rock shocks, which are all made right here in the UK. And also in the mid-1970s, all of the body panels, mudguards, including this fuel tank here, would have all been made of fiberglass back in the day, but these old fiberglass fuel tanks certainly don't take too kindly to modern day fuel, so it's best not to leave the fuel in these tanks for long periods, as it tends to eat away at the tank's insides. But there's certainly no denying that this example here of Phillips is still a little Spanish cracker, and quite quick as well, as you'll more than likely know. But it was its original looks that actually caught my eye on the day, because there are still a few of these Persons still being raced out there, but many of them are fitted with upgraded parts or have had modern substitutes bolted onto them, which don't always make them look or perform any better than they did all those years ago. But for sure, apart from maybe those different rear shocks and maybe different handlebars, this is still a decent original looking bike. And what's more, it's still being used for the purpose it was made in the 1970s, and that is to be raced on a motocross track. But without question, one of the rarest and unusual bikes that I spotted in 2023 was this machine that I came across while I was in Northern Ireland. And this bike here is owned by Irishman Cecil Pearson. And this is a bike that was built by Rickman Motorcycles owner Adrian Moss, who basically took a stock Rickman Scrambles frame and then he added a big single-cylinder matchless G50 road racing engine to create this rare and very unusual Scrambles racer. Now, just in case that you don't know already, the bike's owner Cecil Pearson is the man who owns those fantastic collection of Rickman Jap Scramblers, and this special here is the latest addition to his collection of 9 Jap-powered machines. Now, Adrian Moss told me that after completing the build of this bike, he did race it a few times, and sometime later it was then also raced by British Scrambles legend, the great Andy Robertson, who took the bike to 3 straight wins the very first time that he raced it, and that was at the Robbie Allen Memorial Meeting at Tinto Motor Park in Scotland in 2014. Now, when I say that this bike is rare and unique, it's because, as far as I know, this is the only Rickman Scrambles frame that's had a purebred road racing engine fitted into it. Now, this big single-cylinder matchless G50 engine originally was designed to take on the Manx Norton road racing bikes, which were dominating road racing away back in the 1960s. And this massive G50 was a popular power plant for many riders who wanted a big British 4-stroke single to power their road racing chassis. Now, the crankshaft and the camshaft at the top of the head were both connected by a drive chain that ran inside this gold coloured casing here on the right hand side of the motor, and also on the transmission side the big G50 engine had a dry clutch and not your usual wet oil cooled multi-plate units that are normally fitted to these kind of big single-cylinder engines. Although unfortunately I'm not going to get into too much detail on this bike in this particular video, because there's already a full and much more detailed feature about the construction and the parts used on this bike currently on my channel. So if you think that this is maybe a bike that you'd like to know a little bit more about, then certainly check it out on CDBTV. But for me personally, this Cecil Pearson owned and Adrian Moss built Rickman G50 was without doubt one of the more outstanding bikes of 2023. But to continue our 4-stroke theme in this look back to 2023, this is another classic that I spotted at the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show a way back in February, and this fantastic BAC here was a bike that was on display and offered up for sale on the day, and this was a machine that was built, owned and raced by CCM racing legend, the mighty Jimmy Aird. Now again, Jimmy was certainly in attendance on the day that I grabbed these clips, but I'm still not able to furnish you with any details on the parts that are bolted onto the bike, but you can rest assured that if Jimmy had a hand in putting this lovely BSA together, then you can pretty much guarantee that it's not a stock standard BSA Victor, and it'll have some super trick parts bolted onto it to make it go really quick, because a standard original BSA is certainly nowhere near fast enough for somebody the likes of Jimmy Aird, who was an ex-Works CCM factory racer. But you can certainly see that Jimmy's stayed quite loyal to his beloved BSA engines, similar to the power plants that were used in his Clues CCM bikes away back in the day. And this big BSA four-stroker will more than likely have bigger valves in the head and maybe high lift cam, and probably a few other upgrades on the internals of the motor. Although, as I said, I was never given any of the specs on the bike on the day of the show, so I can't really comment on what specific parts are bolted onto this bike, but it's still a cracking looking machine nonetheless. And once more you can see that a nice pair of British-made rock shocks are bolted onto the back of Jimmy's machine. But the bike's frame and this swing arm are certainly a bit of a mystery, and it's certainly not something that I've come across before, but the chances are that this frame might even be a custom-made chassis, because you can see straight away that it's all very well made. But a nice pair of alloy hubs on both the front and at the rear, and also a not so nice pair of horrible black wheels, which we'll try and add no further comment about. But here at the front end again, I'm not exactly sure what kind of forks are bolted here onto Jimmy's bike, but they could maybe even be a pair of Italian Serianis or something similar, but I'm just guessing again, so that particular point may be completely wrong. But I still can't help thinking that this little BSA would have looked a lot more handsome with some nice chrome or polished alloy wheels bolted onto it, and I'm sure that by now you're all up to speed on my personal views of black wheels on classic dirt bikes. Anyhow, I do know that Jimmy successfully sold this bike over the course of the 2 days of the show, and it was bought by another British classic racer called Craig Holmes, who now races it at various vintage and classic race meetings around the UK, and these few clips here are of the bike all ready for action when I managed to snap it around the paddock at the Scottish Classic race event at Bassenthwaite in the summer of 2023. So I'm looking forward to coming across this Jimmy Aird built machine in the forthcoming 2024 Classic racing season. Okay, so just to finish off our look back at 2023 Part 2, we're going to take a walk around Cecil Pearson's fantastic collection of Rickman Jap Scramblers. And again, these superb bikes were another of the many machines that I filmed while we were in Craig Antlet in Northern Ireland at their annual charity scramble back in July of this year. So basically, Cecil has 6 Rickman frame bikes and 3 special Harry Stitt built chassis, and all 9 machines of the big single-cylinder 600cc John Alfred Prestwich 4-stroke motors to power them. Now, these long-stroking 600cc Jap engines were originally built to be used in speedway bikes, and were a 1930s design that had a total loss oil lubrication system, whereby you would just simply fill the frame with oil, then it would be pumped around the engine, lubricating all the important parts, and any excess oil would just simply drop out onto the ground, hence the name total loss oil lubrication. And as we move on to the transmission side of this engine, now the clutches on these Jap engines were dry clutches and not your conventional wet oil cooled items that were more common on most other off-road bikes, and the ignition that supplied all of the sparks was just a self-contained battery and ignition module that you simply charged up before a race and then placed it inside the bike's frame. But these John Alfred press switch engines didn't run on your regular gas, but on the much more volatile methanol fuel, which of course increased their power, but also made the motor run that little bit cooler than it would using regular petrol. So it also helped to reduce pinging or pinking that you sometimes got from these big torquey 4-stroke motors. Now this particular Jap motor is sitting inside a custom-made Harry Stitt frame and not one of the older 1960s Don and Derek Rickman designed chassis. But as you can see, it still looks absolutely stunning with that big bruiser of an engine sitting inside the frame. But as I mentioned, Cecil has 3 of these Harry Stitt specials to complement the other 6 Rickman bikes, and all 9 machines are also fitted with the Norton AMC gearboxes as well. But if you're looking for a template on just how an old school vintage dirt bike should look, then here it is, because these Cecil Pearson bikes certainly have it all in absolute bucket loads, because they have a classic steel tubular frame, an engine that's both fantastic to look at and mega powerful as well, and of course plenty of alloy for mudguards, side panels and that fuel tank. Now naturally, I know what you're thinking, that Cecil can't of course ride all 9 machines himself, although he still likes to take one around the track from time to time. But to ride the others, Cecil has a team of riders in James Thompson, Harry Stitt, John Griffiths and Adrian Lappin, who all race these machines both in their native Northern Ireland and on the UK mainland as well. And in this combination of clips, some of which were filmed at the Westmoreland Classic Scramble and others at Cecil's own racetrack at Craig Antlet, will certainly give you a nice insight into this very unique and rare collection of classic racers. But not only are these bikes so nice to look at, they're all highly competitive on the track as well. And if you've watched some of my other racing footage from Northern Ireland's classic scrambles, then you'll know already just how quick and competitive these bikes are on the track. And in the pre-1968 or even the pre-1975 class, there's certainly not many bikes that can live with these Jap scramblers when they're on their game. So if you were ever to get a chance to see or even hear these bikes in action, then do make a point to check them out, because don't be fooled by their antique 1960s chassis and those 1930s Jap engine, because these bikes are a collection of fire-breathing monsters and are much more than capable of taking on more modern machinery, and more often than not finishing ahead of it. But all of these fantastic machines are the result of this man's many years of hard work, because as you can gather, it's almost a full-time job for Cecil, prepping, maintaining and servicing all of these antique racers. And as far as unique motorcycle collections are concerned, I'll wager that there's no other collection like them around in Europe, because the one and most important factor about this collection is that these are no show bikes, as these Rickman and Stitt Jap racers are still being raced daily and are highly competitive as well. So it's all thanks to the dedication and the skills of the Jap master himself, Cecil Pearson. So there you have it. That's our latest selection of machines from my wonders around the paddock during 2023. And as we head towards the end of this year, we still have time to post one more video. So when we come back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, we'll be taking a look at this quite nice looking 1971 CZ twin shocker. Now this bike here, of course, is not a fully original bike, but nonetheless a cracking looking classic twin shock racer. So I do hope you'll join me to take a look at this lovely looking machine. But from all of us here at CDBTV for the time being, it's goodbye for now.